Great. First of all, thank you very much for coming. And just before I get on started with the presentation, I just wanted to get a quick show of hands. Who's using serverless of any form in production? Okay, that's great. Who's had quite a bit of pushback from the business in trying to get serverless in production? Yeah, a fair few. Who would like to get serverless in production and currently the business is saying no? Okay, good. All right, well, just to give you a bit of an overview, this is supposed to be fairly lighthearted because it's the end of the day. But if you have any actual technical questions, I'll be more than happy to take them on at the end. And also we have a few people from the team here so they can come up and answer some of the questions. Great, so a bit of background about myself. I spent a summer at CERN. I've worked on medical devices, some high-performance computing stuff. This is primarily hardware. And then I came to One Fine Day. So I worked on a project called Sherlock, which is a little keyless entry system that allows you to open the doors both for your building and your flat by putting a little box in your house. And then now that's become its own venture. And then very quickly after that, I got involved with the mobile team. So we have a staff app, which is what allows us to run things in the field. When One Fine Day is about to rent a house, we are the ones that do all the logistics between the homeowner and the guest. So the homeowner doesn't need to worry about anything. And what we do is that we take all their things and put them away in an itemized place. And then after the guest has stayed and left, we then put everything exactly as it was. So if the blue toothbrush was on the left and the red toothbrush was on the right, we've got to make sure everything is exactly as it was before. So we have an ontology system that has information about every single detail in the house. Every single house is different. And then we have a set of rules that define what needs to be done depending on what's in the house and also the period of the year. So we've got over 5,000 homes. That means we've got over 10,000 rooms. And there's one way to get it right, but unfortunately there's a million ways to get it wrong. So the staff app allows people to take pictures of how everything was so that the team that comes back, even if it's not the same team, they can review their pictures very quickly and then check and put it exactly as it was. And then we have the tree shape ontology that you saw before, also in the staff app that allows them to make sure they go through the list properly, and we have that safety net there. In terms of guest app, we obviously know that a lot of people rely on their phone to properly enjoy their holiday, so we gave them a little bit of that. They also get local phone calls if they want to. They can book a restaurant for free. They don't need to worry about roaming or anything like that. And then we also have a guest app that gives them information about both the house, so how to operate the 5 different Apple TVs and Sonos systems, as well as things near the house and enjoy the neighborhood. So now I'll be moving on to the part where mobile and our backend systems were working together in the past and how we thought about it. So I'm going to make it very generic. Imagine you have your own idea and you say, well, I'm really good at this, so I'm going to throw the instructions in the bin. But then very quickly come to realize there's actually a little bit more complexity than you would have hoped for. And this is how you feel. You actually end up cutting yourself a lot more than you wished. And this is the end result, which is something you seem to be happy about, but everybody else doesn't really understand. It's sort of confused as to what really is. So in terms of microservices, they can be very fun, and they have a lot of value to them. Everything's very modular, and yes, if you are very organized, everything can be built and made very pretty, and you end up with something that's very nice. But there's the risk of ending up in a situation where you have the Babel Tower and everybody speaks a different language and different microservices are written by different people. You don't have the right contrast in between. So it can feel a bit like this, where your source of truth is not really somebody else's source of truth, or at least the way to do things. And if you're a mobile developer and the APIs are not the first-class citizen or the first thing that people worry about, it's a lot of pain for you. So when you come and ask for new APIs, you tend to get this. So what happens is that you end up with a workaround on the client side, right? So you don't want to feel the pain, so you add all the logic to your mobile app and client to counteract for the shortcomings of some of the logic in the background. And here's where, for us, serverless came in and worked really well. So we now use API Gateway and Lambda to abstract some of the complexity and also to reduce the amount of networking calls that we do from the app to the backend. Rather than we just do one, everything else happens there. We don't need to retrofit. We can retrofit to the legacy code through the Lambdas, but not in the app. So in essence, instead of the flip-flops, we actually have the icing on the cake. We abstract all the little sharp edges there, and it means that whereas before, if somebody changed the API, I didn't tell you, you then would have a little panic moment when everything in production changed. But now everybody agrees, and there's an abstraction layer, so you can be happy. From a business point of view, everybody's always going to be in a rush. So they say, why are you going to try this brand new thing? We don't have time. And you probably feel like everything's falling apart in production and don't have a lot of time as well to put it aside. But the benefit is because you do everything in layers and you do everything in small pieces, this is a way to sort of convey the message to the business, say, we're going to try this. It's actually reliable. We can run this in production, and it's very, very useful. So with that, I'd like to leave it to the questions. And if you have any particular things you want me to talk about with regards to how we actually use this in production, both for mobile as well as other pieces, I'd be more than happy to go through that. Anything?
Yes. So by doing this, I guess you're transferring some compute from mobile client to AWS.
Yes.
And compute on the mobile device is effectively free.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of cost is this?
Free in terms of money?
Yeah.
It might be free in terms of money when you look only at the first degree of costs, but when you then start thinking about the fact that having that additional complexity means that the mobile app logic needs to be, the counterpart logic needs to be implemented on the app, on the guest app, then on the staff app, then on an additional app. It means that you then need developer time to recreate and maintain all of these across many places rather than in just one central place. And then in addition, there's also the fact that when you have a lot of logic on your app, you have very little control, at least immediate control, as to how things get updated, so you need to push a new build. Whereas if you can move much, much faster and say, okay, the central API logic is this, I'm going to now adjust it, all of a sudden you have much better results, rather than having a group of team leaders on the other side of the world in Los Angeles saying, hey, this is not working, why is that? And then you need to push a new build and wait for the build to reach their phone and be installed. You can just change it on your side.
Yeah, I get and I agree with most of those arguments. I'm just wondering what sort of, as a ballpark percentage of the total operating cost of your infrastructure, having this extra Lambda abstraction layer, like what sort of order of magnitude?
Order of magnitude, I would say, is less than 1% of what we actually spend on AWS, because we've got the website and a whole bunch of stuff. For you to have an idea, the pictures that we take in the field, there's about 300 pictures per activity. A team can do about 3 activities a day. That's just under 1,000 pictures. We upload all these to S3. In the summer, we have somewhere between 100 to 300 people running activities across the world. And then what that means is essentially we update a lot of images to S3, and we use Lambda to create thumbnails on the fly as and when they're updated. When we started doing this, even when we did the whole batch processing for the 5.5 million pictures we had since 2015, it wasn't even a dent on the bill. So from that point of view, we haven't even noticed. I mean, we can go and check, but the business hasn't come back and said, what is this like? It costs a lot more money to just spend a couple hours with a few developers trying to retrofit something than to actually just go and do it. Right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you come across any restrictions in terms of what Lambda lets you do and not do to implement big back-end functionality? So the fact that you're not running on a server, well, you are running on a server, but you're not, and it's not the environment that you're used to, and like DB connection pools can work in a different way. Did you come across limitations and things you had to do it a different way because you were suddenly not operating in the environment that you were used to?
Okay, well, that's a very good question. And to be honest, I personally haven't reached those limits, or we haven't been pushing the envelope in those dimensions. The things that we've done so far is rather than try to replicate something we had on a VM, for example, or a Docker instance onto a Lambda, is to say, well, there's a gap missing, or we have it on the mobile phone already, let's just move it across. And by doing this, we've usually just connected the API gateway to another API, an RPC endpoint, HTTPS endpoint. But in essence, we're not really dealing with DBs straight away from Lambda, at least not at this point. And then that's the use case of the APIs, and the use case of the images. We just created thumbnails on S3 objects, so it's fine. But yeah, we'll let you know. Yeah, sure.
I'd be interested in knowing a bit more about the sort of actual stage from a code change through to deployment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you run some version of all the lambdas locally before you push to Amazon, or do you push to like a dev stage on Amazon and test everything and then roll it out to a prod stage?
Uh-huh.
So let's say you made a big change to one of the lambdas.
Mm.
How does it get from there to production?
So we use the serverless framework, and I think Luke and Marco could probably answer this question in more detail, but we don't just go out cowboyish and put it on production, if that's your question. We try and have it separate, but if you want the details as to how we've gone about it, then the guys can help. But yeah. Great. Sure?
What cost-saving measures did you look at any cost-saving measures? I know going to Lambda itself is obviously a massive cost-saving measure. Did you look at any faster routes to getting your transactions completed, or like stuff that you wanted to put into live, or just like transaction on a daily basis, for people trying to book places and stuff like that.
Okay, so in terms of what other benefits did it bring beyond just the raw cost of billing?
Yeah.
The short answer is everybody's sanity, because we had to do a lot of things with a fixed number of people, and we also had some legacy code on the back end, and we wanted to dramatically improve our app. And so instead of trying to bash our head against the wall where we waited for somebody to deliver something, we just went out and took 2 mobile developers to just write the lambdas in either JS or Python, whatever they felt they were more comfortable with, and then do that piece themselves rather than to have to wait for a resource constraint team to come and do it. And from my perspective as a product manager / my business hat on, the fact that people are still around and are still helping and are still developing. Otherwise, if we had dragged out this difficult API situation for quite some time, people might have decided to just go, right? Or be 5x less productive, because ultimately that's the sort of blocker that we had, and we completely managed to work around it. Yeah. So it's not so much the billing, is actually, in my eyes, there's like 100x more cost savings in the fact that people can actually get their job done with this other tool rather than have to wait and have to work in lockstep with another team.
So you remove blockers?
Primarily, yeah. It's a key added value to delivery from a business stakeholder point of view, because all of a sudden they can ask for something and see it done even without having to tap the platform team on the shoulder. Not that they're slow or anything, it's just that there's a lot of things riding on that, and when things get scaled up, the mobile team can sometimes not be at the immediate urgent set of priorities. But that's just how things are. We just made the relevant tools for ourselves as the mobile team, with my mobile team hat on, to make sure we did not have any frustrations or any waiting to do. Yeah.
Question. When you come up with a new idea, or the team comes with a new idea, do they first think, okay, let's do it serverless, or they go, let's go EC2, and then later on, let's write serverless as a glue? Is it?
Oh, that's a very good question. In my mind, but then this is basically my personal preference. It's best to do the first implementation if it's something fresh on using whichever tools are easiest for you, at least for the prototyping stage, and then also think about what's easier to maintain with a limited number of people. Now, this particular use case, we had to sort of add the glue in between, like you said, because the old microlith of microservices was something that wasn't going to change. We couldn't also migrate that over. We just said, well, we need some logic in between distance in the app, let's move it across to Lambda. But I mean, yeah, we've had other initiatives within the tech team that have directly started with Lambda. And I'm sure you've tried this. EC2 does have the additional overhead of having to manage it and so on. So once you've done serverless for one thing, the additional cost of creating more lambdas and more setups is not extremely high. Great. Yeah, sure.
How do you deal with timeouts and stuff like that?
With timeouts, we have a lot less timeouts, and I'll tell you why. We have to work in circumstances where, for example, you have a team leader who's in the field, is working in a basement in Paris, right? And they have very poor connectivity. They're having to be working on GPRS or 3G because they're just somewhere at the end of the building. And in the old app, the logic was such that you make one request based on the data, you make a second request based on the data, you get a second request. The likelihood there of having an issue is 3 times as much than when you say you make a request, you wait and come back. If you're referring to timeouts between the Lambda and platform itself, I would be very surprised if this was one of the problems. I mean, we haven't had issues since starting this, and the platform backend is pretty robust. Normally, if we get an error back to the Lambda, it's just because the data that we're requesting is wrong somehow. Have you experienced issues with timeout?
Yeah.
A few? Okay. Of the operation time of the Lambda, or the network back into the Lambda or out of the Lambda?
To receive the data is kind of times out.
Oh really? So the Lambda asking for something and...
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. Let's catch up later then. Okay. Sure.
Is there anything else you're using besides S3, Lambda, and API Gateway? Are you using SQS?
For mobile, in particular?
In general, like in your architecture, like do you use SQS to synchronize Lambdas and...
So we don't use SQS for between Lambdas right now. We use RabbitMQ for the platform, all the microservices, but that's separate already. And then I'm particularly keen to personally, maybe not for production just yet, but try out step functions just because I have a particular interest there. But we don't have queues between the Lambdas, because as I said, the Lambdas we're trying to do right now are primarily pass-through. So you just have the API gateway, makes one call, makes several calls, comes back. You don't need a lot of orchestration. So, yeah.
What's your deployment?
Yeah.
How do you monitor your serverless?
So at the moment everything's using the AWS logs. We
Do you stream to like a Splunk or ELK, or do you have like a center point where you gather all the logs from each Lambda and then you can...
So at the moment, in platform, in the old one, which is not Lambda, we use an LStash, so that's a Kibana and so on. And for Lambdas, we primarily use just run-of-the-mill AWS logs that we get, all the login tools. We haven't added anything on top just yet.
What's your deployment like then?
Do you get the stuff into those Lambdas?
So we use the serverless framework, but then again, in terms of actual intricate detail, then the ASCII markup, yeah, they're the ones that did the real hard work. I sort of nudged the business to say, hey, this is a good idea, let's go do it. Just give us the green light, and they were the ones that put in the talent and sweat primarily. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, last question. Okay.
So were there any performance considerations or changes you needed to make to the data layer in order to accommodate the performance of Lambda?
The data layer such as data layer in the website or data, which...
Well, I presume you have to store data somewhere. You have to have some kind of transactional store. So presumably Lambda would be more scalable and therefore generate a higher throughput activity. So I'm just wondering whether there were any design considerations to, for the data layer to keep up with increase of activity or potential increase.
Well, we haven't been pushing beyond the capabilities of what our current backend could do, just because we're actually just querying that rather than any DB straight away. And again, this is just like a mattress between you and the bed frame. It's not so much a case of we're going to have mattresses all over the world. And yeah, I mean, it's something interesting to consider. But to be honest, from a staff up point of view, it's not like we have a multi-million gamer situation. It's just a few people out in the field. We have a lot of pictures, but those go through Lambda after they've been uploaded. So yeah.
Cool, thanks Eduardo.
Thank you. Cheers.